The Galactic Council chamber, a towering dome of shimmering light and translucent panels, bustled with activity. Delegates from hundreds of species filled the hall, their forms as diverse as the stars themselves. Crystalline beings glimmered beside furred diplomats, while insectoid representatives clicked their mandibles in animated debate. In the center of it all stood an enormous containment field, its pulsating energy casting faint ripples across the chamber floor. Within the field lay the Apex, a creature so feared that its mere presence was enough to send shivers down the spines of the bravest council members. The Apex was unlike anything most of the delegates had ever seen. Its scaled hide glistened like liquid metal, and its four glowing eyes tracked every movement with unsettling precision. Spikes jutted from its back, and its powerful, sinewy limbs betrayed a strength capable of snapping an armored vehicle in half. It was a living weapon, the deadliest predator in the known galaxy. The containment field hummed, a barrier reinforced by layers of quantum shielding, gravitational distorters, and harmonic suppressors. Nothing could breach it, at least according to the Council's top engineers. This precaution was vital because the Apex had been captured for a historic purpose, to be studied, understood, and, if possible, tamed. Enter Captain Evelyn Harris, the sole human in the chamber and the reason for the Apex's capture. Harris, dressed in a standard-issue exploration jumpsuit, stood with an unshakable calm amidst the commotion. Her brown hair was tied back in a practical braid, and her piercing blue eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much yet still found reasons to hope. The council representatives eyed her warily. Humans were a recent addition to the galactic stage, known for their adaptability and boldness, but also for their unpredictable behavior. Harris's mere presence was controversial. Allowing a human into the chamber with the Apex was practically an act of insanity in their eyes. Captain Harris, began Vralik, a towering reptilian delegate whose emerald scales shimmered under the chamber's lights. You understand the gravity of this situation, do you not? The Apex has decimated entire colonies. It is a symbol of terror and destruction across the galaxy. Harris nodded, her expression unreadable. I understand perfectly. Then why, Vralik hissed, his voice rising, did you request to be the one to confront it? Harris smiled faintly. Because I know something you don't. The room erupted into murmurs. Vralik's slitted eyes narrowed. And what might that be? That the Apex isn't just a mindless predator, Harris said, her voice steady. It's intelligent. And I believe it can be reasoned with. The chamber fell silent. The notion was absurd. The Apex had never shown signs of higher reasoning. It was a creature of instinct, a killer. Yet Harris's confidence was unwavering. The Council's hesitance to grant Harris access to the Apex wasn't just born from fear of the creature, it was fear of humanity's audacity. Humans had a way of disregarding boundaries, challenging norms, and pursuing the impossible. They were unpredictable, and unpredictability in the Galactic Council was considered dangerous. But the Council also understood that they had no better option. Conventional methods of study had failed, and attempts to sedate or communicate with the Apex had ended in disaster. Against their better judgment, they agreed to Harris's request. You will enter the containment field, Vralik said, his voice heavy with skepticism. But if you provoke it, the Council will not hesitate to terminate the creature, and you along with it. Understood, Harris replied calmly. The containment field deactivated momentarily, allowing Harris to step through. The Apex's four glowing eyes locked onto her immediately. It rose to its full height, towering over her, its metallic hide shimmering like liquid mercury. The delegates tensed, some gripping the edges of their seats. The room felt like it was holding its collective breath. Harris moved slowly, deliberately, her hands raised to show she wasn't a threat. She stopped a few meters from the creature, her heart pounding in her chest. But she didn't show fear. Instead, she crouched down, making herself smaller, less imposing. Hello there, she said softly, her voice carrying through the chamber's amplified acoustics. The Apex tilted its massive head, its eyes narrowing. Its claws flexed, digging into the containment platform's reinforced surface. It was watching her, assessing her. You're not just a killer, Harris continued. You're a survivor. I can see it in the way you move, the way you think. You're smarter than they give you credit for. The delegates watched in stunned silence. The apex didn't lash out. It didn't charge. Instead, it lowered itself slightly, its gaze fixed on Harris. The air in the chamber grew thick with tension. You're not alone anymore, Harris said, her tone gentle. I know what it's like to be surrounded by people who don't understand you. But I'm here to try. The apex let out a low growl, a sound that reverberated through the chamber. It wasn't a sound of aggression, it was something else. Cautious acknowledgement, perhaps. Harris reached into a small pouch on her belt and withdrew a silver sphere. She held it up for the creature to see. This, she said, is a translation interface. It lets us share thoughts. If you let me, I can help you understand us, and we can understand you. The apex's eyes flickered, its focus shifting between Harris and the sphere. Slowly, it extended one of its massive claws, as if testing her resolve. Harris didn't flinch. She placed the sphere on the ground between them and stepped back. The apex leaned forward, its glowing eyes reflecting the sphere's metallic sheen. It touched the sphere with the tip of its claw. The device activated, emitting a soft hum. A series of holographic symbols appeared, translating the creature's neural patterns into a form Harris could interpret. A single word appeared in the air above the sphere. Why? Harris smiled. Because everyone deserves a chance to be understood. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted over one another, their voices a cacophony of disbelief and outrage. But Harris ignored them, her attention focused entirely on the apex. You've been hunted, captured, and feared, she said. But I don't think that's all you are. I think there's more to you than that. The apex's eyes narrowed, and more symbols appeared, danger. Fear. Survival. I know, Harris said. You've done what you had to do to survive. So have we. But maybe it doesn't have to be that way anymore. The creature regarded her for a long moment, its massive frame radiating an intensity that made the delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. Finally, it lowered its head slightly, as if conceding her point. As Harris stepped back through the containment field, the chamber erupted into chaos once more. Vralik rose to his full height, his scales bristling. What is the meaning of this? You cannot possibly believe this creature is anything but a threat. Harris turned to face him, her expression calm but resolute. It's not just a threat. It's a living being. And if we can understand it, maybe we can find a way to coexist. The council was divided. Some saw Harris's actions as reckless, others as revolutionary. But one thing was clear, humanity had once again challenged the status quo, forcing the galaxy to reconsider what it thought it knew. And as the apex watched Harris leave the chamber, its eyes followed her not with hatred, but with curiosity. The aftermath of Captain Evelyn Harris's encounter with the apex was a whirlwind of debate and disbelief within the Galactic Council. The containment chamber, once a symbol of terror and control, had become the centerpiece of a galactic controversy. Delegates argued in hushed tones, their voices blending into a cacophony of skepticism and awe. The apex had not attacked. It had listened. And it had communicated. In her temporary quarters aboard the Council's orbital station, Harris reviewed the data from the translation sphere. The holographic readouts displayed a jumble of concepts: fear, survival, curiosity, all interpreted from the apex's neural patterns. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Captain Harris, a soft voice called from the doorway. She turned to see Crix, a wiry avian aide with feathers that shimmered faintly in the station's artificial light. His eyes darted nervously, as if he feared being overheard. Counselor Vralik demands your presence in the war chamber, Crix said, his tone formal but edged with tension. Immediately. Harris nodded, setting aside the sphere. Let me guess, he's not happy. Crix hesitated. Many are, unsettled. Your actions have raised questions the Council isn't ready to answer. The war chamber was a stark contrast to the opulent halls of the council. Its walls were lined with tactical displays, each showing critical points across the galaxy. The delegates sat around a circular table, their faces grim as Harris entered. Vralik stood at the head of the table, his emerald scales gleaming under the room's harsh lighting. He wasted no time. "Captain Harris," he began, his voice sharp, "your decision to engage with the Apex was reckless and unauthorized. You endangered not only yourself but the entire council." Harris remained unfazed. "With respect, Counselor, nothing about my actions endangered anyone." The Apex responded peacefully. "It communicated." "And you believe that makes it safe?" Vralik snapped. "It is a creature of destruction, a living weapon. It cannot be trusted." "It's more than that," Harris countered. "It's intelligent. It has emotions, thoughts. It's capable of reason." "Reason?" Vralik's voice rose. "It has wiped out entire colonies." "And so have we," Harris shot back, her tone steady but pointed. "Every species at this table has blood on its hands. The Apex is no different. The question is whether we can find a way to move beyond that." The chamber fell silent. Vralik's gaze burned with fury, but he said nothing. Harris took a step forward, addressing the entire room. "This isn't just about the Apex," she said. "It's about how we approach the unknown. Fear has kept us alive, but it's also held us back. We have an opportunity to learn, to understand something no one else has. Are we really going to let that slip away?" As the council deliberated, Harris returned to the containment chamber. The Apex watched her through the shimmering barrier, its glowing eyes unblinking. She activated the translation sphere, her voice calm but firm. "We don't have much time," she said. "If the council decides you're too dangerous, they'll terminate you. I need to know more. I need to understand you." The sphere hummed as the Apex responded. Words and symbols appeared in the air, trapped. Hunted. Alone. Harris's heart tightened. "You've been captured before, haven't you? By others?" The Apex tilted its head, and new symbols emerged, chains. Pain. Silence. "Not this time," Harris said softly. "Not with me." The translation continued late into the night, each exchange revealing more about the Apex. It wasn't just a predator, it was a survivor, driven by instinct but burdened by memories of captivity and torment. It had been hunted by other species, forced to fight for its life in arenas, experimented on in laboratories, and discarded as a weapon of war. "Everything you've done," Harris said, her voice barely above a whisper, "it was to survive." The Apex's response was a single word, yes. The next day, the council reconvened to discuss the Apex's fate. Harris stood before the assembly, her stance confident despite the weight of the moment. "Counselors," she began, "I've spent the last 24 hours communicating with the Apex. It's not a monster. It's a being, one that's been shaped by the horrors we imposed on it. Its actions were not born of malice but of desperation." Vralik leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "And you believe it can be trusted?" "I believe it deserves a chance," Harris replied. "We've all made mistakes. We've all fought for survival. The Apex is no different." The room buzzed with murmurs. Harris scanned the faces of the delegates, searching for a spark of understanding. Finally, a voice rose from the crowd. "What do you propose, Captain?" Harris straightened. "Release the Apex into a controlled environment where it can live freely. Monitor it, yes, but treat it with the respect it deserves. Let it show us what it's capable of, not as a weapon, but as an ally." The proposal was met with fierce debate. Some counselors supported Harris's idea, viewing it as an opportunity to redefine their understanding of the galaxy's most feared predator. Others, like Vralik, vehemently opposed it, arguing that the risk was too great. As the session dragged on, Harris returned to the containment chamber one last time. She placed her hand against the shimmering barrier, meeting the Apex's gaze. "We'll figure this out," she said. "You're not alone anymore." The apex tilted its head, a faint glimmer of curiosity in its eyes. For the first time, Harris thought she saw something else in its expression: hope. The debate over the apex's fate reached a fever pitch within the Galactic Council. The chamber was packed with delegates, aides, and advisors, their voices rising in heated arguments. News of Captain Evelyn Harris's interaction with the apex had spread beyond the council, igniting a firestorm of public opinion. Some hailed her as a visionary, while others condemned her as reckless. Harris sat in her quarters, reviewing the latest intelligence reports. The apex had been relatively docile since their initial communication, but its containment field was not designed for indefinite use. The quantum shielding required constant maintenance, and the strain on the station systems was beginning to show. "Captain," Crick said, entering the room with a data pad clutched in his talons. "You need to see this." He activated the display, projecting a hologram of a sleek, menacing warship hovering at the edge of the station's sensor range. Its design was unmistakable: Crixern. The apex predators of galactic politics had arrived. "They've sent the Crixern?" Harris asked, her voice low. Crix nodded. "Their envoy demands an audience. They claim to have a stake in the apex's fate." Harris frowned. The Crixern were notorious for their ruthlessness. If they were here, it wasn't to negotiate, it was to impose their will. The council reconvened in haste, the arrival of the Crixern adding an air of urgency to the proceedings. Their envoy, a towering figure with black, chitinous armor and glowing red eyes, stood at the center of the chamber, exuding menace. "This creature," the envoy said, gesturing toward the containment chamber, "is a threat to every species in the galaxy. Its existence is an affront to natural order. We demand its immediate termination." The delegates murmured uneasily. The Crixern rarely involved themselves in council matters unless it directly benefited their interests. Their sudden concern for the apex was suspect. "And why," Harris asked, stepping forward, "is it such an affront to you?" The envoy's gaze fixed on her, and for a moment, the room seemed to darken. "Because we created it." The revelation sent shockwaves through the chamber. The apex, a creature that had terrorized the galaxy for decades, was not a product of evolution but of engineering. Harris's mind raced as the envoy continued. "It was designed as the ultimate predator," the Crixern said. "A weapon to ensure our dominance. But it proved difficult to control. We abandoned the project, but it survived. And now, you seek to release it back into the galaxy?" Harris stepped closer, her eyes blazing with defiance. "You abandoned it. You made it what it is. And now you want to destroy it to cover your tracks?" The envoy's voice grew cold. "It is a danger to all. If you do not act, we will." The council was thrown into chaos. Delegates shouted over one another, their voices a cacophony of fear and indignation. Some sided with the Crixern, arguing that the apex's existence posed an unacceptable risk. Others, inspired by Harris's words, saw an opportunity to redeem the creature and themselves. Harris stood at the center of the storm, her mind working furiously. The Crixern's presence had complicated an already fraught situation. If the council voted to release the apex, the Crixern would undoubtedly act against it, and perhaps against the council itself. But if they agreed to its termination, Harris knew they would be complicit in a grave injustice. She needed a plan. And she needed it fast. That night, Harris returned to the containment chamber. The apex watched her with its unblinking eyes, its massive form still intense. She activated the translation sphere, her voice steady. "They're afraid of you," she said. "Because you were made to be stronger than them." The apex tilted its head, the symbols appearing in the air: pain, betrayal, alone. "I know," Harris said. "They used you. But you're more than what they made you. You're more than a weapon." The apex's response was slower this time, as if it were searching for the right words. "What am I?" Harris smiled faintly. "That's for you to decide." The next day, Harris presented her proposal to the council. The room was tense, the Crixern envoy watching her every move with predatory intensity. "I understand your fears," she began. "The Apex was created as a weapon, but that's not what it is anymore. It's a living being, one that deserves a chance to define itself. Terminating it won't erase the mistakes that were made. It will only prove that we haven't learned from them." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. "I propose we relocate the Apex to an uninhabited world. A place where it can live freely, away from the threat of exploitation. The Council can monitor it, but we must give it the chance to be more than what it was made to be." The chamber buzzed with debate. The Crixern envoy was the first to object. "This creature cannot be trusted," it hissed. "Relocation is a risk we cannot afford." "And yet," Harris countered, "you trusted it enough to create it. Now you want to destroy it because you fear what it represents." The envoy's mandibles clicked in irritation, but it said nothing. As the council deliberated, Harris returned to the containment chamber. She placed her hand against the shimmering barrier, meeting the Apex's gaze. "We're running out of time," she said. "If they vote against me, they'll terminate you." The Apex tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. More symbols appeared: fight, escape, freedom. Harris's brow furrowed. "If you break out, they'll see it as proof that you're a danger. They'll hunt you down." The Apex responded with a single word: trust. Harris nodded slowly. "Then trust me." The council's vote was split. With tensions running high, the chancellor called for a final session to determine the Apex's fate. As Harris stood before the assembly, she felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The Crixern envoy loomed nearby, its gaze piercing. But as the debate raged on, something unexpected happened. The Apex began to move within its containment field, drawing the attention of every delegate. It placed its massive claw against the barrier, mirroring Harris's earlier gesture. And then, through the translation sphere, it spoke. "I am more." The chamber fell silent. Delegates stared in stunned disbelief as the Apex continued. "I was made to destroy. But I choose not to. I choose freedom." The Apex's words tipped the scales. Delegates who had wavered now sided with Harris, moved by the creature's unexpected eloquence. Even the Crixern envoys seemed momentarily at a loss. When the vote was cast, the decision was clear: the Apex would be relocated, given the chance to live as something more than a weapon. For the first time in its existence, the Apex had earned its freedom. The Council's decision to relocate the Apex to an uninhabited world sparked both celebration and trepidation. For Captain Evelyn Harris, it was a bittersweet victory. The Apex would live, free from the chains of its creators, but its future remained uncertain. She stood in the observation deck of the orbital station, watching as the crew prepared the massive containment pod for transport. The transfer was a delicate operation. The Apex, though cooperative, remained under constant watch. Its containment pod was surrounded by layers of shielding, ensuring that it couldn't escape or be harmed during transit. A specialized vessel, the Vanguard, had been assigned to the mission, its crew handpicked for their expertise in handling high-risk operations. Harris had insisted on joining the crew. The council had protested, but she had been adamant. "This creature trusts me," she had said. "If anything goes wrong, I'm the only one it might listen to." Her argument had been reluctantly accepted, and now she found herself aboard the Vanguard, standing in the ship's command center as they prepared for departure. "Everything secure?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. First Officer Lindsay nodded. "Containment pod is stable. Course is plotted. We're ready to go." "Then let's get moving," Harris said. The journey to the Apex's new home, a remote planet designated Valoria 7, was uneventful at first. The planet had been chosen for its isolation, a lush world with dense forests, expansive oceans, and no sentient inhabitants. It was the perfect sanctuary, a place where the Apex could live without interference. Harris spent much of the trip in the containment bay, observing the creature through the reinforced viewing ports. The apex was calm, its massive form resting in the center of the pod. Its glowing eyes often tracked her movements, and she couldn't help but wonder what it was thinking. "Do you think it understands what's happening?" Zao asked, joining her one evening. Harris nodded. "I think it understands more than we give it credit for. It knows this isn't captivity, it's a chance." Zao glanced at the creature, his expression skeptical. "And if we're wrong?" Harris didn't hesitate. "Then we'll deal with it." "But I don't believe we are." As the ship neared Valoria 7, alarms suddenly blared throughout the vessel. Harris and Zao rushed to the command center, where the crew was frantically working at their stations. "What's going on?" Harris demanded. "Unidentified ships dropping out of warp," the sensor officer reported. "It's the Crixern." Harris's stomach sank. She had suspected the Crixern wouldn't accept the Council's decision, but she hadn't expected them to act so soon. "How many?" she asked. "3 cruisers, heavily armed," the officer replied. Zao cursed under his breath. "They're here to finish what they started." The Crixern hailed the Vanguard, their envoy appearing on the central display. Its chitinous armor glinted menacingly, and its red eyes burned with cold fury. "Release the creature to us," the envoy demanded. "Or be destroyed." Harris stepped forward, her voice firm. "The Council's decision is final. The Apex is no longer your concern." "You do not understand what you're dealing with," the envoy hissed. "It is a weapon, and it will destroy you." "Maybe," Harris replied. "But that's not your call to make." The envoy's mandibles clicked in irritation. "So be it. You leave us no choice." The transmission ended, and the Crixern ships opened fire. The battle was brutal. The Vanguard was equipped with advanced shielding and weaponry, but it was no match for the combined firepower of the Crixern cruisers. The ship shuddered under the onslaught, sparks flying from damaged consoles. "Shields at 40%, the tactical officer shouted. "We won't last much longer." Harris's mind raced. They couldn't outrun the Crixern, and they couldn't win a direct fight. That left only one option. "I'm going to the containment bay," she said, turning to Zao. His eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "I am," she said. "The Apex is our only chance." In the containment bay, Harris stood before the pod, her heart pounding. The Apex watched her intently, its glowing eyes unblinking. She activated the translation sphere, speaking quickly. "We're under attack," she said. "The Crixern are trying to destroy us, and you." The Apex's response was immediate. "Why?" "They fear you," Harris replied. "They think you're a threat. But you can prove them wrong." The creature tilted its massive head, considering her words. More symbols appeared. "What do you want?" Harris stepped closer, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "I want you to help us. Stop them. Show them you're more than what they made you." The Apex rose to its full height, its spiked back brushing against the top of the containment pod. Its glowing eyes blazed with a new intensity, and for a moment, Harris felt a flicker of doubt. But then it nodded, a single, deliberate motion. Harris activated the release mechanism, and the containment pod's barriers dissolved. The Apex stepped out, its massive form radiating power. It turned to her, and the translation sphere displayed a single word: trust. "I do," Harris said. The Apex moved through the Vanguard like a force of nature, its presence both awe-inspiring and terrifying. It made its way to the cargo bay, where Harris and Zao had prepared the ship's remaining weapons for a desperate counterattack. When the Crixern cruisers breached the outer hull, the Apex leapt into action. It tore through the invaders with precision, its movements fluid and calculated. For all its power, it showed remarkable restraint, disabling rather than killing wherever possible. In the command center, Harris watched the battle unfold on the monitors. The Crixern ships faltered, their crews clearly unprepared for the Apex's ferocity. One by one, the cruisers retreated, leaving the vanguard battered but victorious. As the dust settled, the Apex returned to its containment pod, its glowing eyes dimmer now, as if exhausted. Harris approached it cautiously, the translation sphere humming. "You didn't have to spare them," she said. The Apex's response appeared slowly, "Choice. Freedom. More." Harris smiled, her relief palpable. "You proved them wrong." When the Vanguard reached Valoria 7, the crew released the Apex onto the planet's surface. Harris watched from the observation deck as the creature stepped into its new home, its massive form silhouetted against the lush wilderness. As it disappeared into the forest, Harris felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The Apex was no longer a weapon, no longer a prisoner. It was free. "You did it," Zeo said, joining her. "We did it," Harris replied. "And so did it." Back aboard the station, the council received Harris's report with a mixture of astonishment and disbelief. The Crixern filed no formal protest, their defeat had silenced them, at least for now. And though the galaxy remained wary of the Apex, its story became a symbol of redemption and hope, a reminder that even the most fearsome beings could choose a different path. Harris, however, had no interest in fame. For her, the mission wasn't about glory. It was about proving that trust, understanding, and a willingness to see beyond fear could change everything. And she knew the Apex's journey was far from over.